we're going to go ahead and get into the mix here. Our meeting agenda, most of what we're going to talk today is about the value that you can get from analytics. We'll discuss the different building blocks that go into the main analytics module. Those would be our metrics and key performance indicators. We'll talk about data views, homepage tiles, reports. We'll talk about the general analytics configuration. And we'll talk about a new feature that's been added to analytics that we find clients are really excited about. So I'll include that little tidbit here closer towards the end for you. Now let's talk about who the intended audience is for analytics. Generally, we're looking at your frontline and your mid-level people managers, anyone who has employees that report up to them. The benefit of that is that it allows these folks to go ahead and find root causes of any issues that they have. For example, if they're looking at things like absenteeism or overtime and they see someone may have, higher hours than they should, they'll be able to easily identify those folks rather than, say, having to dig through timesheet after timesheet. Analytics tries to provide that information in a much easier to digest fashion. Because of this, analytics is focused on your operational analytics. What that means is that the analytics module looks at the different pay codes that are on a timesheet and then rolls it up through multiple levels of transformation before giving it back to us as analytics data rather than timekeeping data. Now, there is a little bit of a difference between your standard dimensions reporting and your analytics. Your standard dimensions reporting, you'll see that focuses a lot on your transactional data, primarily when it comes to timekeeping, scheduling, and so on. Analytics adds a little bit more depth to this by giving you access to 122 metrics and key performance indicators. There is a custom KPI builder, so you can create your own metrics and KPIs, which is really nice. The analytics module is focused primarily on your timekeeping and your scheduling. And probably the biggest thing that makes it different from your standard dimensions reporting is the fact that rather than seeing everything just at the employee level, you can also aggregate data based on your business structure. So it makes it easier to, say, get department level information or region level information, which is really, really nice. There are 3 main pieces of your base analytics implementation. We'll talk about these in a little more detail in the next couple slides. We've got our metrics and KPIs. We've got our homepage tiles and data views, as well as our reports. Let's kick things off with our metrics and KPIs. Now, your metrics are data values like overtime hours, productive hours, and so on. These will show in your data views and reports as columns. So you'll see a header that says, for example, overtime hours, and then, all of the hours associated with it. Now, your key performance indicators, they take metrics and apply mathematical formulas to them. So, for example, in the one listed here, your overtime hours as a percentage of productive hours, what the system is doing is it takes those overtime hours, divides it by the productive hours, and multiplies it by 100 to give us that percentage. So we can see, okay, compared to the full amount of our productive hours, roughly what percentage of that is overtime? How big a slice of the pie are we talking about? So we'll provide you the tools to create your own metrics and KPIs. And like I mentioned earlier, we provide 122 of them right off the bat. I find the majority of clients I work with, they are perfectly fine with using those. They tend to cover a wide range of asks, but we'll also go over in detail, a little bit further down the line, how to create your own should the needs ever arise. Now, to give you a quick overview of our homepage tiles, you've likely seen some of these on homepages when you log in. These are similar to, your time card exceptions, missed punches, things of that nature. Managers tend to get a good chunk of them so they can keep track of their employees as well. You can see 2 examples here of analytics specific ones. So that one there in the middle of your top 5 overtime by job, we can see, okay, based on the jobs that Ken Martin's employees work, which of those positions tends to have the most overtime. In this case, you can see it looks like RN has the biggest piece of the pie. That might be a clue. Okay, we might be a little short-staffed, might need to hire more RNs. Can give you those kinds of insights. Whereas the chart next to it, this one is aggregated based on business structure, in this case, department. And this was looking at the key performance indicator of overtime hours as a percentage of productive hours. So, for example, we can see, okay, for WHMG admin, it looks like just under 14.5% of their total productive hours are associated with overtime. This can be helpful if you're trying to keep an eye on roughly, how much overtime departments are working. Maybe there's a cap of 10%, and those first two there, since they're a little bit over 10%, that might be a clue to say, hey, let's try and wrangle things in these various departments, get an idea of what's going on, be able to get things to where they need to be. So it's nice because as soon as you log in, you can see these pieces of data. You can, make the charts full size so you can see them, bigger, make it a little bit easier to read. You can click on them and it'll take you to the data view that this information is coming from. So you can see the more detailed information. That way you'll see all of the columns, all of the different pieces that go into it. It's a really nice feature to have. Speaking of data views, these are probably my favorite kind of deliverable for the analytics module. They're very dynamic, so every time you load a data view, it'll show you the most up-to-date information available. So say someone makes a change and 5 minutes later you look at the data view, that change will be reflected in the data you're looking at. You don't have to, run the data view or do anything special. You just log into it and bam, it's done. You can also take action right from the data view. For example, if you're looking at an employee level one, you can click on the employee's name and it lets you jump to their time card, their people information, their schedule, and so on. So you can get to wherever you need to be pretty easily. The charts that you make within the data view can then be converted into homepage tiles like we saw on the prior slide. Similar to what you would expect, say, from Excel, you can format and sort the data, you can group it, you can filter, you can get, pretty in depth with it. But one of the most handy features is the fact that you can personalize a data view. What I mean by that is, let's say I'm looking at a data view and I want to sort it by descending. I can hit save, and anytime I load that data view, it'll be sorted by descending for me. However, anyone else who looks at that data view on their login, it won't be sorted that way. It'll be back to normal. So gives your managers the opportunity to really get a little wild with things, really be able to set things up the way they want without causing too much mayhem for anyone else. I do have some screenshots here, but with you having live data in the system, I'm going to skip the screenshots and we're going to take a look inside your system right here. I made a couple demos, feel like that would be better than just taking a peek at some screenshots. So I'm going in our main menu under data views and reports, data view library. Oops, I'm still logged into WinQuest. Never mind. Let me get out of here. I know I pulled up 98. Just a moment, folks. I was going to say that's a lot of data to have. I think I made 3 or 4. Okay. Come on. All right. Apparently today is a day for technical difficulties. Give that one more go. Okay. There we go. All right. So now if I go under data views and reports data view library, here we go. I made these 4 just to give you an idea of the main 4 types of data views that we have. So I'm just going to pop into the first one here, our overtime analysis by department. I kept these pretty simple. I didn't go too crazy on them just because, we're still in the very beginning steps of things. What I did here was I brought in our component company, division, as well as department. And you can see I brought in 2 metrics, our overtime hours and our productive hours, as well as the KPI looking at our overtime hours as a percentage of productive hours. Right now, this is looking at the last 30 days, so we can see a good chunk of things here. This just sums up each of the 3 columns for us, letting us know, okay, this is the overall picture. And then if we take a look at our charts here, this is where things start getting a little bit more interesting. I created 2 right here, looking at specifically our overtime hours. We can see one broken out by division. Amazon's leading the pack there, which is, no real surprise. Amazon is massive, does all kinds of stuff. And if we look at by department in particular, we can get a little bit more nitty gritty, get an idea of, okay, which areas are having the most overtime hours. So for example, this one here in Maryland, they've got a good chunk, almost 1,200 there. Maybe this is a sign that, okay, we're having a lot of work out of that location. We need to go ahead and say hire more folks or bring on some temporary or seasonal help, something like that. That sort of thing there. And we can see this not only by business structure, but I have it broken out by employee as well. So here I can see, okay, I've got my employee full name. I can see their ID. I brought in the home labor category so we could get an idea of the different jobs that they're working, as well as who they report to. Now the metrics and KPIs, you'll see they're the same. This is also looking at the last 30 days. And if I pop into these charts, these I set up a little differently. So we have, okay, overtime hours by who they report to. So you'll see the manager with the most overtime hours. You'll see it broken out by employee full name. So you can see the individual employees with the most overtime during that 30-day period. And then I broke one out as our labor categories. I'm going to make this full screen just to make it easier to read. So as you can see here, we have our delivery drivers with the highest percentage of overtime hours compared to everyone else. So that might be a clue. Okay, we have our delivery drivers working overtime the most frequently. Do we need to hire more delivery drivers? Things of that nature. You can see things change a little bit. So it goes down a little bit when you're looking to middle mile delivery driver and delivery driver assistant. So depending on what folks are doing, it can change, but it looks like a lot of these are drivers of some kind. And then we have other listed at an additional 10.29%. So usually we will look at setting things up as looking at the top 10, or sometimes folks even want to see, say, the bottom 10 so they can see, okay, these are our least performing folks or the ones who have the fewest issues, depending on exactly what they're looking at. But this will give you a nice idea of what we're looking to do. And one of the great things about data views is you can click on a piece of the pie and it'll filter for you. So right now we're looking at just delivery driver. We've got it broken out, by the managers again and by the employee's full name again, but we're just taking a look at folks with that delivery driver labor category. So you can see these numbers have changed a good amount there. Now, if I wanted to say save it, if I leave this data view, I'll go back to the data view library. I'll refresh so we know it's brand new. If I pop back into that overtime analysis by employee, it's still sorted in the way that I wanted to see. So you'll see this still says 100% over here. And when I mentioned earlier that you can take action directly from these data views, specifically these employee level ones, I'll show you right here with our friend Shahid. You can see we get this nice window of data where you can see, their location path and their primary job. If you come under more actions, you get the option to go to their time card, their schedule, their people information. So let's say I wanted to see their information for this time period of 30 days. I can click on time card and it'll bring me to that 30-day period. I can see, their ins and outs, their totals. If I want to be lazy, I can click on just totals and see everything. So, okay, they've got 170 hours of regular time. We've got 4 hours of overtime. We've got, a couple hours for lunch there. Lets us know exactly what's been going on over the last 30 days. And if I hit back, since I saved my data view, it'll load it up just like that again. You can also filter for different locations. I just left it on all home locations to make it easy, but you can, grab from your hyperfinds or click select locations and grab different pieces of the business structure if you like. You can change the time period you're looking at. We have a bunch of presets here. And then, of course, you can select your own date range. If you wanted to say export this, you can export it as either a CSV by clicking on share and export, or if you want to get a PDF copy, you can click print, and Microsoft usually gives you the option to print to PDF in case you wanted a copy of it that way. Let's say I want to set my data view back to the default settings. I can click restore right here. And once I hit OK, it'll set it back to normal. You get this message here that it's been restored to its normal settings. And now if I look, say, at this home labor category, pie, we can see, okay, all of those are back again. So those are your basic business structure data views, as well as your employee level data views. We offer another kind of data view called a time series. We have those broken out by employee and by business structure again. These are really, really good if you want to look at trends over time. So let's pop into the daily trend by employee. This looks at your last 30 days. You can see here we have a column for calendar day. So it shows us the date as well as the date of the week. This one I did filter to just a couple of employees, just because there was just so much to look at otherwise. We can see here we've got a number of overtime hours. If I want to filter that to get rid of these blank lines, I can set it to is not null. That way it only brings in items that have actual values in them. And if I go to charts, we'll see similar to before, we were looking at, okay, who they report to, the employee's full name. We have it broken out by that home labor category. And then we have a line chart. This is the best feature about these trending charts. You can see the peaks and valleys of the different days, as well as the amount of overtime hours that were worked. So this can help you get an idea of, okay, these are the days of the week where we tend to have the most overtime. And, this one's just looking at the last 30 days, but we can set it to look at different time periods. We tend to offer these looking daily at the last 30 days, as well as by week, looking at the last 90 days. We can also do it by month, looking at the last 3 months, even by quarter, looking at the last 4 quarters. So we do have a good amount of flexibility there, but you can, get an idea here based on the data. It looks like, okay, Saturdays tend to be the high overtime days. That's probably where a lot of folks use. Maybe, if we're looking specifically at Amazon, maybe a lot of folks have, their Prime delivery day set to Saturdays because they know they'll be home. I think mine's set to Saturdays now that I mention it, but you know what I mean. So this is the employee level version. If I pop over to the department level version, you'll see they look very, very similar. I'm going to go ahead and filter this again. And this chart will look a little bit different. So here, looks like we've got those nice peaks for Saturdays again. So seems like that's likely something that occurs frequently throughout, all the different departments and companies and all of that. So, it looks like Saturdays are likely the busiest days, with Tuesdays being the least busy ones, it looks like. So it gives you a nice idea of what is going on there. And this one's specifically broken out by department. So you can see, okay, it looks like that Maryland location has the highest amount of overtime during these last 30 days. And, Amazon has the most overtime in general. So you can get an idea of what these data views can do. And if I go back to my home page, I'm going to go ahead and add a tile just so you can see it in action. So these standards are related to what is available in the system right now. For our purposes, the overtime ones that I created are right here. So let's say I want to see overtime hours by, where's the employee one? It's division. Here we go, employee full name. Let's do that one and that one. So if I were a manager, this is the way I would see the tile. I could say, okay, this is what I'm seeing for the last 30 days. Let's say I want to look at the last 7 days instead. If I click on this arrow, it'll bring me back to the data view. I can click on the last 7 days. I can save it. Now, if I go back to my home page, this has been filtered for the last 7 days. So you can see the numbers are a little bit lower. This also changed a little bit because it's in the same data view and it got filtered the same way. So I can see this in a neater fashion. If I want to see it a little bit bigger, let's say I want to see this one a little bit bigger, we have the option to go full size again. Get that nice peek here of what's going on. And again, if I wanted to say get more detail, I can click on the arrow. It'll bring us right into that data view so we can see different pieces of data, look at the other charts within it, all of that. So the homepage styles can be pretty handy. It's one of those things where it's nice to be able to log in and just, see pertinent data right then and there and not having to, dig through the system and going too crazy on it, which is nice. So that concludes my little demo here on the data views. That way, you don't have to sit through me talking about screenshots. You got to see a little bit of it live in action. Hopefully that was a little more entertaining. Let me bring back the rest of the PowerPoint here for us. Okay, I believe we should be able to see the slide on reports. Now, reports and data views, while similar, there are a few key differences between them. One of the biggest being the fact that you can schedule reports to be sent out for you. So let's say you have a manager who wants to see, their total absenteeism hours for the week every Friday afternoon. You could set up a reporting job to run every Friday afternoon, email it to them. They would never have to log into the system or anything. It would just be done automatically. You can set that recurring. If they want it every week for however long, you can set that up. If you want it going every week forever, you can set that up. Similar to data views, you can format the data, you can group it, filter it, you can apply calculations, really set it up in the way that you like. Similar again to data views, you can set up different visualizations with different kinds of charts. I'm a very visual person, so I always appreciate a good chart to look at rather than, having to sit there and scroll through a table. And one other unique feature of reports is the fact that you can use what's called EasyScript for complex calculated columns. So if for whatever reason you had, say, some very intense mathematical calculations that you wanted the report to do for you, we would be able to help you set that up, which is really nice. Now here we're going to take a look at just a couple screenshots of what these reports look like. As you can see, these look very, very similar to the data views, just not quite as flashy because they're created in 2 different engines. So they do look slightly different, but you get the gist of it. You can create pie charts. You have your table down at the bottom looking at various things. This one's looking specifically at job. So this is one that focuses on the business structure. These folks have job listed in their business structure. If we look at the employee version, again, these look pretty similar. This is looking at the employees taking a look, comparing their overtime hours to their paid hours, as well as some of their scheduled overtime to their paid hours as well. So that covers the main base analytics implementation. I mentioned earlier that we have a new feature that is being rolled out to clients. It's pretty new. It's called Auditor. What this does is it uses artificial intelligence to detect patterns in data. So for something like this, generally we want to have at least 90 days of live data for it to really have enough to start detecting those patterns. Really what you can do with this is you can take a look at things like retro punch edits. You can look at punch time edits in general, if people are working more or less than their schedules, and a number of other things. I believe there are a total of 10 to 12 different items that Auditor can look at. We can have a maximum of 7 set at a time. And it's really nice because it'll create these kinds of dashboards here that you see as an example. You can go ahead and click on the different locations, see, okay, how many punch time edits were done in this location, who were they by, and so on. We'd like to wait for 90 days of live data because if you just have, say, 1 or 2 months, it's not really enough to get a more bird's eye view of tendencies during such a small amount of time. 3 is really the minimum that we like to go for. But this is something that we're included with all analytics implementations. It's not an additional cost or anything to you. I can go ahead and set it up while I'm doing the base implementation. Then it's just a matter of running it, having a good chunk of data in there for us to be able to take a look and talk things through. So if we're talking about what we're going to do in terms of an embedded analytics standpoint, apart from Auditor, we'll be taking care of your homepage styles, your data views, and your standard reporting. If for whatever reason, let's say you have some really, really in-depth reporting that for whatever reason we can't accomplish within the standard analytics build, we might be able to reach out to the custom reporting team. Or if you're looking at working with very large sets of data, for example, if you're trying to do something like year-over-year analysis, or if you want to run your own SQL queries and export data into your own business intelligence tools like Power BI or Tableau, then to do those kinds of things, Data Hub would really be the option to go for. Embedded analytics is great, but it was not designed to work with, massive sets of data. So really, depending on what you're looking for, we can find a solution for you. To give you an idea of the kinds of items that I'll be delivering, these are your standard reports and data views that I like to provide folks. These have been growing more recently with new items added. So you'll be getting, I believe it comes out to a total of at least 19 to 25 or so data views, depending on what the client uses. I have some folks that don't use rounding rules, so it wouldn't make sense to give them a rounding rule impact analysis. I've also had folks that don't really schedule things on a regular basis, so an actual versus schedule would not really be something that they would be looking to use. But based on what your needs are, we can add or subtract from this list. This isn't set in stone. This isn't, okay, you're getting this and only this. No changes can be made. This is just an example of what some of our standard deliverables are. Now, to give us an idea of what the implementation looks like, we're at step number 1, having our overview. Since you're already live, I know that your pay codes and your business structure are already set. You're in production, you're not in UAT anymore. Our next step after this call would be to schedule a pay code mapping call. It's about an hour long. What I do during that call is I pull a copy of the pay codes in the system. We look at them together and we fill out this workbook. It's very simple to do, thankfully. It's really just telling the system, okay, these pay codes count as productive time, or these pay codes are absenteeism codes. really just a way to categorize the pay codes so the analytics side knows, okay, so if someone has these pay codes on their timesheet, that equals this many regular hours or this many absenteeism hours, this many overtime hours, and so on. So we'll be working on that together. That's really the foundation for myself to be able to create the rest of the analytics build, everything built upon that pay code mapping. Once we have that document filled out, usually go dark for about 2 to 3 weeks. I start mapping the pay codes. I create the metrics, your KPIs, build out the data views and reports. While doing that, I also perform data validation because, you know, if the math doesn't check out, then it's essentially useless. So I'll make sure that everything's adding up the way it's supposed to. Following that, we'll have another call here where we go over what has been delivered. So I'll show you the reports, I'll show you the data views, I'll show you all the different things that we can do with them. Similar to what we did just a minute ago, just with, you know, more than 4 data views. I'll show you the different categories and different pieces of information that you can see. Following that, I like to provide about 2 weeks for clients to go ahead and review what's been delivered. So give you a nice little bit of time to dig into the data views and reports. I find that this helps generate more in-depth feedback because it doesn't put people on the spot like asking during the walkthrough might. So, you know, I like letting folks really get their hands dirty, play with things on their own. And then, you know, if we want to schedule another meeting to discuss anything in terms of adjustments or changes, we can. If it's something that you feel is, you know, just fine emailing over to me, that's no problem as well. We can take it as it comes. Once we have the okay from your team that the deliverables are all set, you know, no other adjustments or changes are going to be made, then we schedule a system admin overview, also known as a knowledge transfer. That is really the part where we'll go over how to maintain the system. So I'll show you how to map those pay codes, how to create metrics and KPIs, how to create data views, how to assign homepage tiles. We'll go through the whole shebang in that call. And I like to record those calls just so that way everyone has a copy for their records, which is really nice. Now, because you're already in production, we can just build in production so we can skip over the migration and the data validation and prod because I'll be doing that anyway. Now, if you want to get a little bit more information on analytics and start, you know, building up those analytics muscles, so to speak, we do have a number of trainings available on the knowledge map. That one in teal, the Administrator Tasks and Outcomes Analytics, that is one that clients have told me has been particularly helpful to them. So I always just like to point it out. But we have a total of 8 trainings that you can feel free to take a look at and complete at your leisure. So just to recap, our next step would be to set up the pay code mapping call, build that foundation out for how analytics is going to function. Again, that's about an hour. The main kinds of folks that we would want on that call are, you know, 1 or 2 people who know the pay codes very well, and maybe 1 HR person in case we have questions about any absenteeism or leave codes and how they should be displayed for reporting purposes. So it doesn't have to be, you know, a big, huge group. It can just be a couple folks. You know, if the 2 of you really handle both of those sides of the house, then it can just be the 2 of you. That's no problem. Following that, then again, go dark for about 2 to 3 weeks while we do the build and do the data validation. We'll have the walkthrough, gather some of that initial feedback, make any adjustments or changes that we need to make. And then once that's all set, we'll schedule that knowledge transfer call to make sure that you can really maintain the analytics system and take ownership of it. One thing I can tell you is analytics is pretty low maintenance. So it's not something that you'll likely need to touch every day or even every week, but there are a few key pieces that are good to know to maintain it. For example, if you ever add a new pay code to the system that you want to see reflected in analytics, it'll really be those kinds of things, or if you decide you want to make a new metric or KPI. But we'll cover all of that together. Make sure that you're in a good spot. Now, as far from me, that is the end of my little spiel here.